Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 141 for the National Land Podcast. I'm your host, Mac Christian. Today, we're talking with the CEO of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Colin Woodall. We're talking about cattle markets. We're talking about different things that will influence those markets, such as environmental impact and what current market trends are, including the Farm Bill. Now, today, we're also covering as our main highlight an urgent and pressing matter, and that is the emergence of the New World Screwworm. This is an epidemic that is coming up through Panama right now as we speak, and this will be in the headlines for years to come because it will take that long to deal with the problem. Now, we talk about the worm's biology, how it will impact beef, what we can do about it, and what is in motion already. This is an absolutely urgent topic, full of great information. Sit back and enjoy. And we are live. All right. So I'm sitting here with Colin Woodall. He's the CEO of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And Colin, I'm just going to kind of throw this your direction right out of the gate. Tell us about the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Tell us what it is you do and sort of the history of the organization itself.
So great to be with you. Thanks for this opportunity to sit down and kind of visit a little bit more about not only the association, but some of our big topics. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association was established in 1898. So we are the oldest and largest national association that represents the U.S. cattle industry. Interestingly enough, at the time, the Denver Chamber of Commerce had a livestock committee. And the Livestock Committee decided to host a national meeting of livestock producers. They did so in January of 1898. And there were livestock producers from 44 states that ended up coming to that very first meeting. And at the end of that meeting, the decision was made to have a national trade association to be an advocate and voice for the industry because so many things were at the top of their list of issues at the time, and they knew that was only going to grow over time. So that decision to put the trade association in place is what launched the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And so to be here all these years later, I think really is a testament to the industry and a testament to the ability to get together and talk through issues. Because if you look at the cattle industry, the way they produce cattle in Idaho is different from the way they do it in Florida. The way they do it in New York is different from the way they do it in Hawaii. And NCBA has members in all 50 states. So to be able to bring all those different interests together to talk through those issues and still be able to stay together, I think, again, is one of the strengths of this association of being able to find solutions when solutions are not always that easy. As I mentioned, we do have members in all 50 states, and this is a grassroots organization that is focused on the producers themselves, those who are every day out with their cattle, whether that's a seed stock operator, cow-calf producer, stocker, feeder, etc. They are the focus of this association. And we are led by cattle producers who have been voted by their fellow cattle producers to take on these leadership roles. In my role as the Chief Executive Officer, I am the hired man for our membership. My job is to make sure that we are managing the day-to-day operations and activities of the association to be that voice for them. And that's what we are. When you look at our vision to be the trusted leader and definitive voice of the U.S. cattle and beef industry, it's all about making sure that producers have that representation, they're being heard, and more importantly, that we can protect this great industry of ours.
Yeah, and from my agency days, I worked with the Idaho Beef Council on a couple of advertising campaigns for they have the Race for the Steaks that they do here in Idaho. It's like a 10K and a 5K that they run here in town, and it's always a really cool event. I was always curious about who was behind, their infrastructure and everything, and now I know. How many members do you have? Do you go by individual memberships, or like how large is the organization right now?
Yeah, so when you look at our structure, we have two forms of representation. One is the direct members that they pay dues to NCBA to be a part of this association. We have 25,000 producers in that category, again, spanning all 50 states. But then we also have affiliated organizations. So the Idaho Cattle Association, for example, would be an affiliated member of ours. The Colorado Cattlemen's Association, the Colorado Livestock Association here in Colorado. So we also have the state cattlemen's associations that are affiliated organizations. So when you look at our affiliated membership and our direct membership, we have access to about 270,000 cattle producers across the country.
I'm trying to take that number in right now. That's an incredible number. And you guys have an incredible reach. Tell me, I want to jump into the main topic here, but tell me sort of how you represent, the beef industry as a whole. Like what is sort of your support network? I know there's governmental representation and lobbying. I know that there's funding and research, but kind of, from your perspective, what's sort of the position that you take?
So it's a great question because there's so many things that NCBA does. Let's start with the advocacy component for producers on what we call the policy side of the work that we do. So twice a year, our members get together, once at our annual convention, which is typically the end of January, early February of each year. And then coming up here in July, we will have our summer business meeting. As part of that, we have committees that are made up of NCBA members representing their state cattlemen's associations that talk through all the issues that we're dealing with. And they want to determine what our position is going to be on any number of things, from taxes, trade, nutrition, farm bills, you name it, we probably have some policy on it. And then that policy is what directs our staff in Washington, D.C. to engage with members of Congress, with those congressional staff, with the White House, the federal agencies. We work a lot with the international organizations and the embassies and their agricultural attaches to go out there and advocate for our position, to try to get these different entities to either vote the way we want them to vote or pass rules or regulations that help us, that don't hurt us. And so that advocacy of just keeping the government out of our members' business is a big part of why we were established and what we do today. But that's not the only thing that NCBA does. We are also out there with producer education, knowing that we have to continually improve as an industry, as an organization, if we're going to stay relevant in the world today and in the future. Because while there is still a lot of history tied up in this association and this industry, we do so by utilizing technology. So we still have cowboys on horseback and cowgirls on horseback that are working cattle, but they do so with a phone in their hands that can tell any number of things about the cattle they're dealing with. So producer education, exposing our members to new ways to produce cattle, new technologies that we can utilize, is also a component of NCBA to help our members stay ahead of that curve, to always make sure that we are doing the best we can and as efficiently as possible, and not only protecting our resources, but also producing that high quality beef that the consumer demands, not only domestically, but internationally. And then you had mentioned real quickly your time with the Beef Council. That's another side of this association. So we are a contractor to the National Beef Checkoff, and we are home of the Federation of State Beef Councils, like the Idaho Beef Council. And that's where checkoff dollars, which is an assessment paid by producers, is utilized on things such as the Beef It's What's for Dinner campaign, and working with retailers and restaurants, and doing research on food safety, product quality, nutrition, and also as in issues management to make sure that we're always ahead of not only domestic issues, but international issues that could impact our producers and the demand for beef. So all of that is done here at NCBA.
And then just to make the differentiation, Cattlemen's Association, right? Are you dealing strictly with beef, or do you incorporate dairy as well?
So we have a lot of dairy members.
Okay.
And it's important to remember that at the end of their lives, every dairy cow is a beef cow. So we have a lot of similar issues, a lot of the same pressures as far as, animal health issues, et cetera. So we work very closely with our friends in the dairy industry. It's important that we're in lockstep.
Excellent. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we included that. So and again, we're going to be talking about the growing crisis, I guess, of screwworms, but I want to kind of jump into the beef industry real quick to get some insight. Prices have been pretty good. What do we anticipate for sort of the duration of 2025? Are there any headwinds? And what do we see as we move on throughout the year? And I don't want to hit you about 2026 because it's commodity, right? So you never know. But what do we see sort of for the duration of the year, and sort of how are things looking?
Times are really good for our industry right now. And if you are a cow-calf producer in particular, and you have cattle and moisture and grass, then you can make money. Demand is through the roof, and the consumer is paying prices for our beef that, quite frankly, we didn't necessarily think they would be willing to pay. But they're willing to pay for it because of the quality of beef today. This industry is one that has spent 40 years working at genetic improvement, in herd selection, in new production practices, ways to improve the quality of that underlying beef by taking care of those cattle that are entrusted with our care. And it has made a difference, because in the grocery store today, if you go to a Safeway or Albertsons or whatever your local retailer may be, you can get prime graded beef. And a lot of times in the past, that would not have been available to you in a grocery store. It would only been reserved for the white tablecloth eating experience. But the consumer can get that white tablecloth eating experience in their homes today because of the effort that we have put into improving that overall quality of our beef. And that percentage of cattle and beef that are grading prime continues to grow. So when you are giving the consumer what they want, they'll be willing to pay for it. And that's what we're seeing. We're also seeing that international demand for our product continue to grow. So with domestic demand high and international demand high, that means that we expect prices for U.S. cattle to remain high for a couple of years now. Now, your point's spot on. All of this could change tomorrow. We have seen so many black swan events over the years that have changed the direction of the market, that you can never be too confident in what the next day is going to bring. But black swans aside, we feel really comfortable that we're going to have a couple of good years here to allow those cow-calf producers in particular to be able to make a little money. And that's what it's about. And it's not just the cow-calf producers, it's also our feeders. It's everybody that's in this beef supply chain. We need folks to make money because we need them to stay in business. The only way you can stay in business is to be profitable. And not only that, it's also the impact on landowners. So many of our members are operating on land that they own, but a lot of them lease land. And we need to make sure that that's a profitable connection between the producer and the landowner as well. So that way we can keep that green space, in particular, keep it as grazing lands, because we know the benefits that come with having green space that is grazed by our cattle. So overall, extremely optimistic and bullish on where we're going as an industry.
Do you see any influence on the marketplace as things have diversified and niche audiences have kind of developed, as far as like you've got your grass-fed audience and your lean beef audiences? Have that kind of helped drive the demand a little bit, being able to differentiate between product?
Yeah, it's been a great opportunity for the consumer to get what they want. If there's a specific kind of beef you're looking for, I guarantee you can find it somewhere today. But at the same time, it also gives the producers an opportunity to differentiate themselves. And if they have a program that they want to produce towards, if it's grass-fed or the never-ever treated programs where they don't use growth hormones and they don't use antibiotics, a lot of times producers can get a premium for that over what the market is bringing. So it has been good for both sides, the consumer and the producers who produce in those programs. We've also seen, since COVID in particular, a real rise in more of the locally sourced programs or locally sourced beef. So people that are setting up at farmers markets, or they have local retail sales, or they're selling online, that has provided a tremendous opportunity, especially for a lot of smaller producers, to get in there, really compete, get a premium for their product, and again, kind of answer that demand that they're seeing from the local consumers. So all of that has continued to build that overall beef demand. And as a trade association, we want people to eat beef across the board. So whether it's grass-fed or traditionally raised or whatever it may be, we're supportive of all of that.
Excellent. Yeah, and yeah, I've got a full freezer at home from my mom, and her partner runs a ranch up in the middle of Idaho, and it's the locally sourced beef is a big part of my family. So I definitely identify with that. What you kind of touched on it really briefly, and I see that as a thing that's been a continued conversation is water supply. And what are the things that you think could influence the marketplace here in the next year? Like we have the continuous water supply issues out west. I know in Texas and in areas with low water supply, they've adopted things like small cell rotation and things like that to compensate for it. Are there any other things that we kind of have? And our discussion today is another thing that could affect it. What are some things that you see could influence both negatively and positively the marketplace here in the next year?
Yeah, boy, that is a long list, Mac, of things that could impact. But I mean, drilling down on water in particular, of course, without water, we don't have an industry at all. And that's not just the water for the cattle, but it's the water for growing the grass. A lot of times our members think about it from the perspective of we're grass growers that just happen to use cattle to be able to manage that land. And it's not just access to that water, especially through aquifers, but just looking at where we have seen prolonged drought. We have the lowest cattle herd that we have had since 1951. And the biggest reason is because cattle have been liquidated due to the fact that people don't have water, they don't have grass, and therefore they can't have those cattle. And if we could really see a change in a weather pattern to get some green grass growing around the country, we would see this industry grow. Now, a lot of times when you see the industry grow, there's a concern that that's going to have a negative impact on prices. But as we talked about, as you see that demand continue to grow, while yes, there may be a little hit to the price compared to where we are today, the demand is there to be able to support us at still profitable levels. So that has us excited. And that's also why we ask everybody to pray for rain these days, because we desperately need that. But it's also more than that. It is about the aquifers. It's about the places where we're tapping in to utilize that to water our cattle, water our crops, and trying to find ways that just make that overall process more efficient. When you look at a lot of the systems that they utilize in the desert Southwest, down in Texas, more efficient irrigation, ways to protect ponds. One of the things that we have seen a lot of people start to use are these black balls that you throw in a stock tank that really cuts down on the amount of evaporation and transpiration that you can see in those entities, whether it's a in-ground pond or whether it's a metal stock tank. Things like that to be able to protect that resource are what we're really looking at. Ways to provide shade in order to help the cattle. There's a producer who won one of our regional environmental stewardship awards last year that has a set of basically portable shades that they can pull around their pasture, open those shades up in the hot, humid mid-Atlantic weather and give those cattle a little rest, which also helps with water consumption. And at the same time, also helps make sure that the cattle are grazing those pastures a little bit more equally too. So a lot of tremendous innovations and technologies that are allowing us to find ways to become ever more efficient in not only water usage, but pasture utilization. And again, finding ways to make those cattle as efficient as possible when we look at the different breeds we use in our selection of putting, like I said, various breeds together in order to get that heterosis to make the resulting calves better than the traits of both their sire and their dam.
Excellent. And so I wanted to ask you too. I've been asking everybody about this one that has any kind of opinion or any kind of plate at the table is what you got any opinion or outlook on the farm bill? Because this thing has been dragging on like nobody's business. And I was talking to former Mac last week, and I made a couple comparisons. I was asking if it was the was the grenade that nobody wanted to jump on, or what's going on here? And his opinion was that it was just an impasse of negotiation where just people are not giving ground on either side of the table on what to push through. I thought it might be political expediency to where like might be some things in there that nobody wanted to really sign their names behind because of an election cycle. But that was my cynical side. What's sort of the outlook on that? Do you have any insight on the farm bill, or where are we at?
Yeah, like everybody else in agriculture, we're pretty frustrated with the fact that we don't have a bill.
Right.
We're working under now the second extension. That extension expires at the end of September, and we may be looking at yet a third extension. For all of us in agriculture, and this is just not a cattle industry issue. This is for everybody. Producers are just looking for a little certainty, because in order to prepare, plan, and execute that plan, you need to know what the expectation is from the government, or what programs are going to be out there, or what you can count on from USDA. And without that, it provides that uncertainty that is not necessarily strategic for us as producers. We just simply want to know, what's the plan? Tell us what the plan is, and we'll be able to produce accordingly, but we just need to know what that plan is. For us in the cattle business, our number one ask in the Farm Bill is to make sure that there is funding for a foot and mouth disease vaccine bank. Foot and mouth disease, FMD, is probably that one disease that concerns us the most these days. And we just want to make sure that we are prepared. That's why we are relying on Congress to jump in and take some action. Now, things actually are starting to move. So the House of Representatives moved their version of what the president terms the big, beautiful bill. And in that are provisions from the Farm Bill, some that are definitely beneficial for us, like the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank.
And there's disaster relief in there and things like that kind of, you could tell which things were important out of the Farm Bill that they really wanted to push through. Yeah,
that's right. So that has passed the House now. We just need the Senate to step up and get their version done, so that way we can get this finalized. But the key point, it's not the entire Farm Bill as we know it. It's only portions of the Farm Bill. So there's still that uncertainty of what's going to happen with the rest of those programs. And the one thing that most people, especially most average Americans, don't understand is that the vast majority of that Farm Bill is actually the federal nutrition programs, SNAP, or what a lot of people would deem as food stamps. That takes up most of the Farm Bill, roughly about 80%. Only 20% really is programs for producers. And when you think about that for a moment, all of a sudden, that's a whole different talking point in looking at federal agriculture policy and what is actually going towards producers and what's actually going towards people who are on these programs.
Yeah, that's almost where you want to see a differentiation, and like, maybe that's two bills, guys.
And that's been a long part of, or a point of the discussion over the years, is where do you want to go with that? Now, the traditional mindset has always been the best way to get an urban or suburban member of Congress to vote for farm policy is to have a tie-in to what their constituents needs, which are food stamps.
And that does make sense a little bit. Yeah.
And that has always kind of been that prevailing thought that's kept them together. But when you look at a lot of the proposed changes to these programs, that's one of those political pieces that you referenced earlier that is making this discussion hard, and has made it hard for several years, which is why we're still out here waiting for a full 5-year farm bill.
And the other part that got me thinking about, what's dragging its heels on the bill is when you look at the boards for the farm bill, like the groupings of it, there's so many people involved. There's like, these committees are huge, and people are going to be people. And the more you get, the more difficult things are. These are huge committees.
Huge committees that cover any number of constituencies and are all trying to be responsive to their constituencies, whether those constituents are the cattle producers or if they are the users of some of these food program benefits, and everybody in between. They kind of have that stake on the farm bill. And with Congress in general, things are just absolutely so difficult to get across the goal line these days, that it's not just the farm bill, that causes this consternation of getting something done. But the Farm Bill right now is kind of one of those poster children of a program that everybody realizes should be done, but politics is just keeping it from getting to that point. We do have some tremendous leadership, though. You look at G.T. Thompson. He's the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee. He has been a great friend to the cattle industry. Senator John Bozeman from Arkansas, another one in his role as the chair of the Senate Ag Committee. We know they want to get it done. We know there is a focus, but we also have to keep in mind that this is just one component of a bigger bill. And in this case, the president's one big, beautiful bill, which has not only the components of the Farm Bill, but there's also a lot of tax components in there that have an impact on agriculture as well.
You just unexpectedly gave me gold, because we've been trying to brainstorm on who we would want to get on the podcast to talk about that. We were going through different committees on names, and you just gave me a couple. So I'm probably be doing some outreach to them. That'll be awesome.
Excellent.
So I do want to steer this back into the original topic we wanted to kind of go through was the screwworm crisis. And so let's talk a little bit about what a Cochleomya hominivorax is. That I think it's the blowfly, or the New World blowfly, which is their pupa stage, is this screwworm. And I think this is a thing. It hasn't been prevalent in our country for so long. Nobody knows what it is anymore. So it's one of those things, like we just got done with COVID, and we've had, what is the other, new cold strains, and there's monkeypox hit. Like, there are these new terms that have come at us. And I think when people hear something like, oh, what, now it's screw flies? But this is an old thing that is sort of coming back. Tell me a little bit about the history of this fly. I mean, what's going on with what is this thing?
Yeah, well, you pronounced his Latin name and scientific name perfectly.
Did I? Okay, because I was gambling.
Oh my goodness, great job. Most people do kind of struggle with that. So you did a good job on that. But in essence, this thing is a fly. It looks very similar to your common house fly. It's about 2 to 3 times bigger. It's got kind of a blue body to it, and big red eyes is what it has. And it is a pest that we used to have to deal with here in the United States. And what it does is it lays eggs. And when these eggs hatch, the larva is what we call this screwworm. And it does exactly what the name says. It screws or burrows into the flesh of any warm-blooded animal, not just cattle. It could be you or me. It could be dogs, cats, hogs, deer, hawks. Anything that's warm-blooded could be a host for this. And in essence, it eats that animal, that host, alive. And you can, without treatment, you could see a full-grown steer or cow or bull die within 4 to 7 days if it's not caught and treated. That's how quickly it can act, and how devastating this little critter is. So we had it back in 40s, 50s, 60s. In 66, we ultimately eradicated it, and we pushed it out of the United States. Ultimately was pushed out of Mexico, out of Central America, and finally isolated down in South America. But here we are. It has come back up, and that is what we are preparing for today, because it is in Mexico, and it is making a beeline towards the United States.
And so these are, because I think most of us, depending on where you live, are used to things like bot flies, where I was making a joke about, I did some rabbit hunting a few years back, and of course opened up the rabbit and there's bot flies in it, and my wife absolutely freaked out, and I ended up being the only person in the house that would touch the rabbit. But it doesn't do the same thing. Like, those kind of live as host in the skin, and these things actually eat through the animal, but I didn't realize it can kill the animal that fast. So this is something where you might not even know that one of your cattle has it, and it's just dead.
Right.
Is that due to infection, or is that the actual action of the fly that causes the death?
It's the actual action of the fly just eating the flesh. And if you're ever curious, and I wouldn't recommend you do it around mealtime, but if you just Google New World screwworm lesions, you can see some pretty nasty things. But the good news is it's treatable. But the key to that is kind of what you just said, is you have to spend a lot of time in amongst your cattle. There is a lot of monitoring that has to go on here to be able to find those lesions. So they like to lay their eggs in moist areas or in open wounds. So it can be in the nostrils, it could be in the mouth, it can be in the ears. A newborn calf where the navel is, where the umbilical cord was, they can lay eggs in there. So you have to be very vigilant in monitoring your cattle, seeing if they have wounds, checking some of these spots to look for the eggs and the larvae. Now, if you find it, we do have a lot of products in the market today that can kill those things. So while, yes, this is an animal health issue, we do have products that can heal those cattle up and make sure that we keep them healthy. So we are making sure that producers are aware of that. But the thing that probably is our best ally is just the way Mother Nature made these flies. The female New World screwworm fly only mates once in its life cycle. So the way that we eradicated this in the 60s and the way that we're doing it today is by having sterilized flies put out into the wild, put out in the open, so that way that sterile male can mate with the female. The female is fooled into thinking that she's been bred. She then goes through her cycle, dies without laying eggs, and we have one less fly we have to worry about. That's the process that we're going to utilize this time around in eradicating this. But the thing that we have to worry about is, as of right now, we don't have enough production capacity for these sterile flies to be able to stay ahead of it. So that is one of our probably biggest priorities, is making sure that we can get some domestic production of these sterile flies, because today we can't produce them here in the United States.
So, and that's, yeah, so we had, and I want to sort of ask you about the impact pre-1960s, but we had this epidemic of flies. We airdropped them, right? We airdropped sterile flies. Right. And we got the population pushed down all the way to Panama. And that was sort of our line, where like we eradicated the existence of these flies to keep their impact from our cattle populations down. And I mean, not just cattle populations, it impacts cervids like deer and things like that too. Like anything that we hunt, eat, those kind of things, or just enjoy, it eats them from the inside. And we got the population pushed down. Did we stop the program and then that allowed them to grow? I mean, how did they breach the line is one question. And so, like, to your point, our production has dropped because they've been sort of out of sight, out of mind for a while. But I'm going to go back to my original question, is what was the impact on the cattle industry prior to the 1960s?
Yeah, so it was a purely animal health issue. So the good news is this doesn't have any impact on beef quality or food safety. That's really a positive thing. This truly is an animal health issue. And it was just the increased costs, because you had the increased cost of the medicines that you needed to be able to treat the cattle, but you also had the increased cost of additional labor. As we talked about, you need cowboys and cowgirls out among your cattle every single day looking for these flies, looking for the larvae, looking for the eggs. And in doing so, that meant folks on horseback that were roping cattle, checking cattle every day that we haven't had to worry about since. So the labor costs were just astronomical because of all of that hands-on labor that went into monitoring your herds. So that was probably the biggest cost to us, is the amount of time and money spent on labor, equipment for your labor, et cetera. And that's labor that we don't have around anymore. So that is one of the concerns that we have as an association, is just getting the word out to our producers on how much time they're going to have to spend out among their cattle, and whether or not they can find the help to bring in order to effectively do that. Because as we just talked about, if you miss one and you don't come back for a week, it's very easily to foresee that animal, if they did have larvae, would be dead. And then when you look at the price of cattle these days, that is a significant loss on something that you missed just because you weren't out there monitoring your cattle, or you didn't have the resources or the help to go help monitor those cattle. So it really was about the added labor and the cost associated with that, and then the additional costs that you would have to spend on your medication and treating those cattle.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that as all I can do is study, that I've studied about this, is that there were, prior to the 1960s, these whole networks of inspectors that would check cattle for lesions. Is really all you can look for, right? At that point, is looking for lesions or open wound kind of situations where you could think that could cause an infection or an infestation. And it's been 60 years since we've had to worry about this. So the profession's gone away. There's only a handful left that really even know what to look for. Or you're looking at adding staff and then training them and setting up sort of an infrastructure around these cattle as this threat grows near. There's a whole slew of things to think about with this. When we're talking about what's going on right now, I think I kind of started to put my toes in there a little bit. This line has been breached in Panama. Has anybody discussed why? What do we know why they've started kind of like going up through South America?
Yes, that is one of the things that we're still trying to get the real truth on what happened. So the reason why we no longer have domestic production is because when the fly was finally pushed into South America, it was determined that when you look at the Isthmus of Panama, that narrow piece of geography, that really we only needed one facility. It's a facility that's there today in Panama that produces about 100 million sterile flies a week, that was going to be enough to hold the line. As you said, that line has been breached. We still don't have all the facts as to the why, but as soon as it was breached, away they came. And a lot of that was governments either not knowing or governments not putting in place border closures or movement controls. There's a lot of just illegal movement of cattle a lot of times in Central America. So all of that is a reason why these screwworms have had a chance to blow through that line and start to expand and head towards the United States. Now, Mexico does have a fruit fly facility that they have indicated that they can turn into a sterile New World screwworm production facility fairly quickly. And the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, just made a commitment last week to spend $21 million to help the Mexicans get that up and going. But we still need production here in the U.S. because it was utilizing about 400 to 500 million sterile flies a week back in the 60s to eradicate it. And as I said, the Panamanian facility only makes about 100 million a week. And once they get this facility up and running in Mexico, that could also be just about 100 million a week. So still not enough for us to be able to fully control and ultimately eradicate this pest again.
You made me think of military history there. It was kind of, the Panama was sort of the Thermopylae of the Americas, where you can condense your enemy to a small area and it doesn't take as large of a force to hold them back, but they got through the line. Yeah. This might be a little bit more of a bug science question for you, but do you know what the gestation cycle of the fly is from egg to adult?
Yeah, so a matter of hours between the time that the egg is laid until it becomes a larva that then screws into that animal. So pretty quick on that egg laying. From there, it really is a function of the host, how many larvae are in there, and then also the ambient temperature. Once that larva is done feeding and ready to pupate, then it falls on the ground, and that could the pupation from the larva to the fly could be anywhere from a matter of days to a matter of months, again, depending upon the weather, because we have learned that pupa can actually stay in the soil for up to a year if the weather is cold.
That's awful.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I wanted to, and I'm impressed. Not only CEO of the beef organization, but also an entomologist. Evidently, you've had to like really become well rounded.
We are all learning a lot about this New World screwworm.
Well, and I wanted to ask you about the gestation cycle, because that's going to apply to production. Because not only do you have to set up the facility infrastructure, get the square footage to do something, get the scientists there, get the clean facilities created, but then you have to wait for the populations to start cycling through to get a population that can grow more flies and then drop it. Like, there is a lag to being able to address the problem, and then you're working with multiple countries to do it. Is all of that sort of building the picture as to why people are using the words inevitable with the fly impacting Texas?
Yeah, it is. It is. And what we have discovered here recently is by the time you see the fly, you very well could already have some significant larva impact on your cattle. It happens so quickly. So your point is spot on. Given this fast life cycle, that's why you've got to stay on top of monitoring your cattle and knowing what to look for, knowing how to treat, making sure that you can treat immediately, are all going to be key and basically preserving your cattle and your herd and ultimately your livelihood.
And to your point, even if they're, I'm going to say eliminated, but unseen in a certain area, you're not out of the woods for up to a year, because you could have a new ballooning of population that just they were in the soil and just kind of hanging out. Like it can reoccur. You think you're out of the woods and you're really, really not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And also, while we can spend a lot of time trying to monitor and doctor our cattle, as I said, cattle aren't the only hosts for these things. And when you look at the wildlife and the way the wildlife interact in all states with cattle operations, but especially in South Texas, that one would be devastating to the wildlife, could be devastating to the hunting industry, devastating to landowners and cattle producers who have diversified their operations for hunting. And then again, just another source of these screwworm flies coming from a population that are really hard to monitor and doctor and treat. So it just seems like so many things are against us here, other than this fact that the female only mates once. And if we can get our domestic production identified and up and running, then that could definitely help us mitigate the impact here. And as I said, our goal is to get that thing pushed out of not only the United States once it gets here, but pushed back into South America where it was. And then go back to your earlier question, answer the question, how did they get through? And what do we need to do this time around to make sure that it doesn't happen again in the future?
Yeah, and that's one where, I mean, you sort of understand it when it's been, 60 years of out of sight, out of mind, right? Like because fundamentally, you think about it, well, why didn't we have like a reserve supply? It's because we didn't have to worry about it for 60 years. And you've got, allocation of budgets from a federal level to be able to take care of something like this. Who's going to maintain something that doesn't exist for 40 or 60 years? Yeah. Eventually, the funding is going to go away. You're going to stop working with those. But then somebody doesn't hold the line down the way and there's no backup. And now you've got maybe like a decade-long problem where you've got to continuously drop these sterile flies to push them back for a long period of time in order to get those populations down and get it back down to how long did it took us like a decade or a couple decades to get it pushed down to Panama in the first place, right?
Yeah, several decades.
And so, so this is a long-term thing. There's no quick fix especially because they're flies. I mean, I think any of us that grew up around agriculture know the flies can survive dang near anything. And, right. And they seem to just appear. So is there any idea on, do we know what the mortality rate was in the beef industry prior to the elimination of these flies?
So that's a great question. I don't know that. We've been kind of looking. We haven't really found too many statistics yet.
You say probably not a lot of records kept at that time. It's just like,
yeah, mostly it's just been a recollection of how hard it was, or how many resources it took to do the working of the cattle and the monitoring of the cattle. That's what you see more than anything else in some of the historical documents that we have dug up.
Is there any kind of preventative vaccination that would eliminate it? Because I don't know of anything. It would be similar to something like a tick or something like that, and you probably don't want that in your beef. Is there anything on that level to like prevent?
So there's not. Like I said, we can treat very well, but so far we have not found the prevention, which is why this thing is concerning to us, and why, again, the only really effective tool in stopping it has been that sterile fly production and then dispersal into the wild.
How are you addressing this from your perspective with your organization? What's sort of your role in this equation?
So our role is multifold. One is to continue to push USDA and Congress to get the funding established for the construction of a domestic sterile New World screwworm fly production facility. Everybody now knows we need one. So we just need to make sure that we are pushing them to get those commitments as quickly as possible, because, it could take a year or more to construct something like that. And this is one of those scenarios where time is of the essence, and every day we lose is an opportunity for a further incursion by the New World screwworm. So pushing the Congress and the Secretary on getting that done is one portion of our response. The second portion of our response is working with these animal health companies to try to find, are there new products out there? Where has the technology changed since the 60s? Are there new approvals needed to get some of those technologies out there to help heal these lesions, take care of the cattle, keep the cattle healthy? And also to explore what other options may be to create sterile flies. Things have changed a lot in 50, 60 years. And so is there genetic engineering opportunities to be able to create those sterile flies faster than the traditional method? Things that we've heard some talk about, different technologies, trying to learn more about those, bring those to the attention of policymakers and regulators to see if there's anything that could help us with our response. And then probably the biggest thing is just making sure the producers are aware of what to look for. What do these flies look like? What do the eggs look like? What do the larvae look like? What do you need to pay attention to? What portions of the cattle do you need to look at? When you get one, who do you need to call? Or do you need to send samples to make sure that those are New World screwworms? And then what are the products available to keep your cattle healthy? That producer education component is also something that NCBA really owns more than anybody else. The good news is, as I said, this is not a food safety issue. It's not a food quality issue. We're probably going to have to answer questions of the consumer, but more than anything, it's going to be what's the impact of this to their dog and cat, not necessarily what's the impact to their steak, because as we mentioned, any warm-blooded animal has the potential to be a host here for a New World screwworm.
And you all are really on the front line of this thing. Like, just when thinking about it, any cattle producer, it's not like, there's co-op organizations within the state or within, adjoining states or sister states that will work together. But the organization that drives a unifying voice behind the entire industry would be one like yourselves. And it really puts you in this sort of like pulling everyone together to face this thing. This is a large project for you all. Is it like primary concentration right now? Like, is this sort of the key thing that you all are all keeping you up at night right now?
Yeah, we seem to be spending way more time on this than just about any other issue. And as we talked about earlier, there's a lot of important issues out there, and ones that we're still working on. But yeah, this one has our attention. It has for a while. We have spent a lot of time talking about New World screwworm, continue to do so. But until we get this eradicated, this will have to remain a top priority for NCBA.
Yeah, and I can imagine the communication campaigns that you'll be running to inform the public, because that was the first thing I've talked about this with a couple people now, and the first thing was like, oh, what's that going to do to demand? Because there will be an interpreted like, oh, it's a disease, or this could impact my plate, or this could damage beef. And with anything like I mentioned bot flies, right? Like an animal with bot flies is perfectly edible. You just don't eat the bot fly, right? So it's one of those where it's not impacting the food source. It is strictly the tissue directly around where the animal is. Like there's a whole thing there that is going to be a hard, like from a communication standpoint, the interpretation of what this is versus what it actually is are going to be two different things. And that again puts you all in the front line again.
Yeah, it does, because we're going to have that conversation directly with the consumer, but also with retailers, with restaurateurs, with food service, just to make sure that all of their answers or our questions are getting answered ahead of time, and that we're ahead of them on which questions that they're going to ask. Because if we can do that, we know that just given the demand, if we can just make sure they understand that this is an animal health issue, it's not a food safety or food quality issue, we believe we'll be able to mitigate that. But it will require us to have those proactive conversations, which is why you have seen NCBA start to talk so much about New World Screwworm, is because it's a progression. It's a progression to identify that there's a problem, to educate our producers and the landowner, the livestock community on what this is, the wildlife community as well, and then take that to the consumer.
Excellent. Well, I've been trying to keep track of the clock here, and I want to be respectful of your time. For those listening, this is the CEO of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. You got a full schedule. So I want to give you an opportunity here to let people know how they can contribute, how they can participate, how they can join, how they can do it volunteer, any part of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and where they can find information from you all and how they can get involved.
So NCBA really lives by one pretty simple mantra. It says we want to keep the government out of your business. That's whether you are a cattle producer, a dairyman, just a landowner, anybody who is in the business of owning land, utilizing land, protecting land. Our job is there to make sure that we mitigate that regulatory burden on you and on things such as New World Screwworms or other diseases or issues that impact us, that we get ahead of those and do everything we can to try to mitigate or stop those black swan, or in this case, black fly issues that we deal with. And that is something that we are doing every single day. This is not an organization that is focused on anything other than the cattle industry. That is our passion. That is what we talk about every single day. And we have a full-time staff, not only here in Denver, but also in Washington, D.C., that's being that advocate. And so you can learn more about the whole host of issues that we're working on. We just covered a few of them here today. We've got any number of things from, as I said, nutrition to environmental impact to the Make America Healthy Again and the dietary guidelines. All of those are things we're working on. You can find out about that at our website. That's ncba.org. Encourage you to go check it out. We would love to have you join up, and you can join up online as well.
Excellent. Well, Colin, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for taking the time to talk through this and those the other topics we covered. Hopefully talk to you again here in the future. Maybe we'll get you on again, but very much appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's been a great conversation. I look forward to joining you again sometime. Hopefully soon we can talk about eradication of New World Screwworm. Maybe.
Yeah, hopefully we get to talk about how they're gone.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you.
This concludes episode number 141 for the National Land Podcast, talking with the CEO of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Colin Woodall, about cattle markets and the New World Screwworm. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com. Remember, subscribe to this podcast because we have many other good topics coming at you soon. Thank you.